Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Diary of a CMO. I think I need to work on my intro because every time I pitch, hello, I kind of go up down, but it's all nobody's complaining. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Diary of a CMO. As always, I am so pleased and excited to have the guest that's joining me today. In preparing for this episode, I dug deep into the interwebs, and I saw more or less the evolution of this marketing powerhouse, this communications powerhouse. I am so pleased and excited to introduce Enzo Scarcella. That's a 10 over 10, Enzo?
That's probably an 8.
Oh, snap.
For my father's hometown, they say Scarcella. But
Oh, come on now, Enzo. How could I have gotten that right?
with your posh accent, Scarcella's fine.
Enzo is the Chief Communications Officer of the MTN Group. Oh man, and let me repeat that again. He's the Chief Consumer Officer, pardon me, of the MTN Group. I am so excited to have you join me, Enzo. I'm going to allow you to do an intro for those who are meeting you for the first time, and sort of trying to capture. In doing my research, I've seen the breadth of your experience, but I'm going to let you do the honors because I was super blown away by your profile. So please, for those who are meeting you for the first time, Enzo, how would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Tayo. Firstly, thanks for the generous introduction. I mean, I'll tell you a bit about myself because Barack Obama once said he was a skinny kid with a funny name, who was given a chance. And I feel a bit like a kid who's grown up in Africa with a funny name, who's been given lots of chances. So I mean, why does somebody who look like me have such a very Italian name? So I was born in a very small country of Swaziland. Today we call it Eswatini. My father's Italian from the south of Italy, south of Naples, and my mother is half Zulu, half English. So, and that's how kind of you get an Enzo Scarcella that looks like this, right? So I grew up in Johannesburg largely, but when I was 18, I did what most foolish 18-year-old boys do, and I went chasing a girl to America. The great thing about that was I was afforded a phenomenal education. So I spent a year at boarding school there, and then I ended up playing football and doing my undergraduate studies at Harvard University. So I spent 4 years in Boston, and that kind of period ended in 1994, which for those of you on the podcast who know your history, it was a big year in South Africa. That was the year of our first democratic elections. I voted on Beacon Hill in Boston, and I still get goosebumps when I say that. And I made a commitment that day to come back to South Africa. And as soon as I graduated, a month later, I landed in Johannesburg and started looking for a job. Like most Harvard graduates, I wanted to go into management consulting or banking. But while I was on the search for those kind of roles, I was offered a marketing role at an upstart company that I knew nothing about, and the people who worked there knew nothing about, really. It was called MTN. So if our elections happened in April 1994, the MTN network started in April 1994. And I started working there about 10 weeks later. So the first GSM business in Africa, along with our competitor, and I was among the first 100 employees. I then kind of moved on from there, and I went into a phenomenal business that was really my university after Harvard, and that was called South African Breweries. And if you look across the landscape of any marketers or any business people, especially in South Africa, I'm kind of I have a prejudice that when I don't see SAB on the CV, I start asking questions. But like a lot of leaders in South Africa will have SAB on their CV. a lot of senior leaders, and that's because they had a phenomenal training program and just phenomenal leadership who cared about talent. So I had the great privilege of working there, and I worked for some phenomenal people who I still owe a debt of gratitude to. I then kind of, as a young kid, as any kind of 32-year-old would want to do, you kind of think you're much smarter than you are. And I said, I want to be a CMO. And the MultiChoice Group offered me that opportunity by being CMO of the M-Net brands. And then I moved from there into retail, a short stint in retail, and then I moved back into telco. And I've spent the last 16, 17 years in telco with some of the most blue chip companies in South Africa and Africa. And yeah, I kind of look back on kind of this kid who was born in Eswatini and think I've had an amazing ride. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Wow. The funny thing is I'm still stuck back at, chasing a girl to America. I'm stuck back there.
Yeah.
So I'm stuck back there. Do you care to elaborate, please? What was
not
going
my
on?
wife, Tayo. It's not my wife. So, as happens with most foolish teenage romance, it ends in tears, right?
Right.
And so when I arrived there, and I used to be, it may not look like it now, but I was a decent footballer. So I got a soccer scholarship to the university she was at. And I excitedly took a bus there to tell her this news. And I've now discovered that anytime a girl says to you, we need to have coffee and speak, I know it's going to end in tears. That's what happened. So she had a boyfriend when I arrived there, but as I say,
oh man, not your finest hour, Enzo.
Not my finest hour, but I'd say that particular moment of chasing a girl to America changed my life profoundly. Because I kind of got into educational institutions, which I'd never have had the opportunity to do if I didn't make that kind of foolish journey.
Well, I mean, it turns out like, God works in mysterious ways, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. There's a plan. There's a plan for all of us.
Man, thank you very much for that intro, Enzo. Thank you so much. It definitely lightens up the mood and allows for a very organic conversation. I appreciate that. You took care of that for me. When I start out the podcast, I typically try to find a less a softer conversation to kind of ease myself in. But you pretty much smashed that ice for me, so I appreciate it. So, Chief Consumer Officer. I must say, especially on the African continent, that's not the most popular role. I think we're kind of accustomed to Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Information Officer, CTO and things like that. But Chief Consumer Officer is one we're not quite acquainted with. Can you, for those who may not know, what's your day-to-day like and what's your purview within the MTN Group?
Yeah. So I'll give you a reason for the nomenclature, right? If you think about telco businesses today, they really have a number of P&Ls, right? As MTN, the MTN, sells to consumers, right? So you see people on the streets of Lagos selling SIM cards, and that's the way we understand MTN to be. Yeah. But MTN as a business also sells enterprise business solutions. Right. So SD-WAN, PABX, fixed line connectivity, et cetera, right? So that's, we serve enterprise, and then we have a fairly substantial wholesale business based out of Dubai. So if anybody wants to buy undersea cable connectivity, wholesale minutes, we have a wholesale business that sells that to them. So MVNOs, the like. So you have a consumer business, you have a enterprise business, and you have a wholesale business. So what I do is head up the consumer business, which is largely the way you'd understand it, which is voice, data, selling to individual consumers like you and me. So, and what does that entail? That entails pretty much the whole gamut of what that proposition looks like. So if you look at the value chain, It is sales, sits in my portfolio. It is product development and pricing. It is devices. It is then when things go wrong, customer experience. So all of that is in my
Got it.
portfolio.
Got
And then we do stuff that is, we'll speak about later in this podcast, but I think is probably the genesis of the new way of marketing called customer value management, which
it.
is analytics and one-to-one marketing. But
Got it.
so that's what the chief consumer
That's
officer
the universe
is.
on a daily basis.
I don't think my father knows what I do, but now you do, Tao.
I think the same applies to a lot of us, right? Before my dad
Exactly.
passed, I'm pretty sure he didn't have an idea of what I did. But thank you for educating our audience that may not get
Yeah.
a sense of what your role entails. Now, let's take it from the consumer standpoint, right? You've been in the telecommunications space, I think you just said about 17, 18 years or so?
That's correct, yes.
Fantastic. So I wanted to ask you, from your point of view and what you've seen, and having been in that industry for that long, and even beyond the industry to other verticals, what are some of the biggest shifts in consumer behavior that you have seen in your time, as a marketing or communications leader? What are some of the biggest shifts you've seen in consumer behavior? And also, how do you think these behavior or have influenced marketing over same period of time?
Okay. Yeah, so I'll start just around about 2008, 2009. And you'll find out why I say that. Because I think a fundamental shift happened in our industry, but I think it affected most industries, right? So I think we lived in largely people wanted access, right? So before 2008, people wanted access just to a phone line where they could speak to somebody, and they could bring their loved ones closer. In 2009, Apple launched a device on 3G called the iPhone. And all of a sudden, people went from walking around like this to walking around looking at their device. And that inflection was the inflection from a voice world to a data world. And I think putting a powerful computer in the palm of people's hands was one of the profound shifts in consumer behavior, not only in telco, but across all industries, right? I think that kind of led to probably, I'd say, something I saw in my early years back in telco was premiumization across all categories. You saw it in liquor, in whiskey, etc. You then saw kind of premiumization, and I think we started kind of giving a bit of a luster to the way we communicated with people, and we started adding brand extensions that were upwards, as opposed to, before that, we kind of had a premium product and we had knockdowns so that people at the bottom of the pyramid could afford it. We saw kind of a premiumization of various categories, right? So I think that's kind of second shift I saw. The next was in marketing, particularly to digital and the web, right? We started talking about Google. Everybody was like, you can find anything on Google, and people were very excited about Google, like the world's encyclopedia. And that kind of started and email, all of that. So that was kind of the early 2010s, right? And then I think then social media exploded, right? We started with Facebook, and then we went to Instagram, and I mean, then we had the era of social, right? And everybody became a publisher. Everybody became a Tayo, So everybody had followers, you had influencers, micro-influencers, and people became media, right? Yeah. And I think that was a change in consumer behavior, because at a kind of macro level, you saw a move towards self-publication. At a micro level in consumer behavior, you saw consumer advocacy. Consumers started to understand their power, right? If brand A doesn't give me anything, I can tell my friends, and I can tell more than my friends, because they'll repost, right? So I think that changed, and I think we've been in that era probably for the last 10 years, and I'd say over the last 2 years, particularly, and I'll say when I was at Harvard, we used to go to MIT, and I used to see some guys doing their PhD talking about artificial intelligence, and I had no idea what this was. And 25 years later, you come and you say, okay, this is now what artificial intelligence is. Ultimately, artificial intelligence has hit the consumer world since ChatGPT arrived, right? Now, some of my teams have been working with artificial intelligence and machine learning for the past 2 or 3 years, but now is the time of the consumerization of AI. What does that mean for us as marketers, right? And as business people? I think it is hyper-personalization, hyper-localization, and hyper-accuracy in marketing. So now you can speak to a consumer with a personalized product in a personalized channel in the moment that they need it. And this kind of feels like, marketing has come to kind of the point we always thought was what we were aspiring to.
Interesting. Wow. Okay, so now I understand why you went all the way back. So thank you for
Yeah.
saying that to me ahead, because I think indeed we can't quite talk about major consumer shifts without talking about the move from voice to data. Definitely one of definitely a big one. But I'm curious though, which of these shifts do you think that which of these shifts do you think that brands still aren't paying enough attention to? Because I think that there might be some things here. I mean, obviously AI is still very relative new in terms of adoption and things like that. When you look at the other elements, which one of these do you think that brands maybe need to pay a bit more attention to? It could be maybe a trend as a subset of some of these shifts that you just mentioned. But which one of these do you think that brands might need to pay a bit more attention
to? I'd say, with the move from voice to data, often the move went from communication to experience, right? So you saw the rise of experience. So it wasn't what does brand say, it's what does brand do that defines how I perceive a brand. And I think we still think we can change people's attitudes and behaviors through communication. And I think communication can build emotive connections, but ultimately people's opinions of brands are formed by experience. So you've got to communicate, but whatever you communicate, you've got to deliver, right, in your product. So if you say your product's going to work and it's going to deliver somebody crystal clear video, it's got to deliver crystal clear video, right? Because nobody believes your ads anymore, right? And if you say to somebody, when you have a problem, we'll fix it in 24 hours, you got to fix it in 24 hours because people don't believe you. So I think if you look at brand value was very much about positioning and communication. Today, it's about that and more. It's about that and the augmentation of brand experience. And with digital brands, where your channel, your product, everything lives in kind of the web and Web 2.0, experience is it. Experience is your brand. So, and I think we disconnect often communication and product and brand experience. And actually today they're one for me.
Wow. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. You definitely hit the nail on the head with the experience bit of it. There's clearly a lot more that as you were speaking, and I'm thinking in terms of my own experience of brands as a consumer now, not even as a professional. You are absolutely right in terms of that experience from the point of the communications to the products after sales, etc. I think for sure you're absolutely right. There's a lot more that brands can do in that space. Speaking about like product promise, and this might be a sticky one. Speaking about product promise, one of the things I've pondered about is for a telecoms brand or telco brand like MTN, how do you balance brand love or building that brand equity or that brand value or brand love And the occasional, sometimes inevitable service frustrations. I mean, this might not be the case for MTN, but how would you recommend, your counterparts in other companies? How do you recommend? Because I mean, sometimes when you get on Twitter and then you see one particular telco brand is being hammered. There are the usual suspects. At least in this part of the continent, it's not MTN. No, it's not MTN. I'm sure the brand people who use the brand I'm talking about know themselves, but let's not get into that. The point is, how do you balance that? How do you manage, building brand love, and this sort of almost inevitable, occasional telco service frustrations? And again, this is not the case for MTN. Let's make that clear. So we're trying to render, counsel or advice for our counterparts at other brands.
Oh, you're a generous man, Tao. I'm an optimist, but I'm a realist, right? I know, MTN, we do billions of transactions a day. If you think every customer, every moment, you need technology to be holding it together, when they're doing a financial transaction, when they're doing a data transaction. So there's a lot we are doing. So even if we have only 1% downtime, those are billions of transactions. So there are lots of opportunities for things to go wrong. So I'm realistic to that opportunity, to that kind of flaw we have. And I think there's lots of friction in the way we serve customers, right? But what I'm optimistic about is that we are consciously aware of some of our flaws. And I think we work every day to fix those. But I think what it is this concept that I kind of planted earlier in our conversation that says brand promise and brand delivery need to go hand in hand, right? And when you are working, whether you are the CMO or you are the frontline staff in a store, what you are trying to do is deliver on a customer's wants, needs, and desires, and trying to empower them to live a better life, right? Because that's kind of our promise. Right. And what we need to do culturally is get everybody to believe that. And I think in some parts we get it right, but we also get it wrong. But what I can promise you is we're not going to stop doing it. But I think as a lesson to everybody, I think you've got to get everybody in your business aligned that our job is to serve the customer, right? And the people in senior positions, what I always say to them is, if you don't serve the customer directly, if you're in HR or finance, make sure you look after and empower the guy who's at the storefront or at the call center. Your job is then to serve them, to make them better at serving the customer. Don't get in their way. So I think that's often where we get the friction wrong, but we're working in that direction and working to get it right. But philosophically, and the lesson I can impart are two lessons. Right. The one is brand love and brand experience have to be intertwined, right? And that's working towards kind of the convergence of those is what every marketer should be doing. The second is culturally in the organization. Our job is to serve customers. And if you don't serve customers directly, support the people who serve customers directly.
I like your thoughts about, that alignment from top to bottom. Because I think that sometimes that's kind of where things might go wrong. The brand promise and the brand experience, the task, just to kind of try to, encapsulate what you just talked about. The task is to ensure the brand love and brand experience converge as much as possible every time the consumer interacts with the brand. And if you are not directly servicing or serving the customer, ensure that you are supporting those who are as much as possible. I think that alignment from top to bottom is really, really critical. Speaking about top to bottom, by extension, leadership, you have been in leadership positions for like God knows how long. It feels like from the first few years of your professional career, you immediately became a leader in some capacity. I wanted to ask you because sometimes, this is not a political show, and we don't claim to be. But sometimes the quality of leaders that we produce as a continent leaves a bit to wonder, if you get what I mean. Therefore, I always like to speak to, when I'm talking to corporate leaders, marketing leaders, leaders like yourself, I always like to ask, you know, obviously drawing from your own experience as a leader across all the companies you worked with, how have those experiences shaped the kind of leader that you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you learn, where you learn most, is in times of kind of turmoil, and times of difficulty, and times of failure, and I think we all fail, right? And if you don't recognize failure and draw the lessons from it, I think you pass up the opportunity to grow, right? So, and I'll tell you my earliest lesson in leadership. I mean, you spoke about I was kind of a young leader, and I remember the first time I had a leadership position at SAB, and I was young, and I thought I was a hot shot, and the CEO at the business was a larger than life character, Norman. And he had quite a bit of affection for me. So he used to call me into his office and say, "How are you doing, with the new role?" And I remember one day saying to him, person X isn't pulling their weight, and this person isn't doing a good job on my team. And he held his hand up like this, and he said, "Enzo, here's lesson number one in leadership. The fish rots from the head."
Oh,
You know, exactly. And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Think about it and come back to me." And as I walked out of the office, I realized
you
what
had
he
an
meant.
epiphany.
I had an epiphany, and since then, the first thing that I try to do, and I don't always get it right, is when things go wrong, I look in the mirror and say, "What can I do differently first?" Because I can only change myself. I can't change other people, right? And how do I need to lead better? And that needs to be the first thing we ask ourselves before we start asking how should people follow better. Because people only follow the way you lead. So that for me is probably the most
Mm,
profound lesson. And this was kind of 25 years ago, but probably the
Wow.
most profound lesson I've had in leadership. And it probably still, it reorients me in times of trouble.
Wow. 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 I think the blessing is to have leaders who are that present. I mean, I imagine for the CEO, who was that present and who was genuinely interested in you and your growth to be able to provide that sort of direction for you, even at such an early stage. So, a big shout out to him. I'm sure when he looks at you today, he will think to himself, "Oh wow, he turned out great," as I imagine. My next question is around some of the things that has happened over time. It appears that telcos have moved from selling connectivity to sort of delivering digital lifestyles.
Yeah.
If it's streaming, if it's this, if it's that, and I just wanted to ask you, as someone who is in the thick of it, how should marketing evolve to reflect this sort of broader value prop? I think that if I use we're talking about MTN here. I remember everywhere you go, was very apt, for the connectivity proposition, if I may put it that way. But as telcos, and I see that even with MTN, the same thing applies. As telcos evolve to more around delivering digital lifestyles, how should marketing evolve along with that to reflect this broader value prop?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, right? One of the things I think we always have to be cognizant of as marketers, is this concept that what you sell and what people buy are not the same thing, right? And I
Mm,
constantly have to talk to my product managers,
mm,
because they say the customer is buying data. No, the customer's not buying data. The customer either is buying access to education by logging onto an MITx website. He's buying entertainment by logging onto YouTube. He's buying closeness by calling a loved one. That's what they're buying. You may be selling a technology, but they're buying a lifestyle solution, right? Now, and then because of the way technology industries tend to be structured, they tend to be structured by product. You have a guy looking after voice, a guy looking after data, a guy looking after digital services. But consumers don't live their lives that way, right? Consumers are farmers, they are traders, they are business people. And you've got to say, okay, how do I deliver solutions that have all of these product elements in it that actually solve a customer's problem? If a customer's problem is productivity, right? He wants to speak to, and he's a business person, there needs to be a voice component. There needs to be a data component to be able to log on to platforms such as this, but he may need Microsoft 365. He may need Microsoft Teams as part of that package, right? And there needs to be seamless connectivity with great upload speed so his video never breaks up. That's what he wants to buy. He wants to buy a connection to business. He wants to buy business success. And you've then got to think, okay, what products do I have in my portfolio to deliver business success for this guy? Right? So, or this lady, so that's, and I was speaking to some young people today about Zambian farmers. I said, what Zambian farmers don't want from us is data, because the first thing young product managers think about is you can use this for Facebook. And the Zambian farmer's like, I don't care about Facebook. But what he cares about is, tell me what the weather patterns are. Tell me what crops to plant. Tell me how to plant them, right? Tell me what price I should sell them at what market, right? With your fintech products, give me, I need money before planting season. I can only pay you once I've harvested. Give me a soft loan that does that for me. And I don't care what the interest is, right? But that's the solution he's looking for. So, we potentially have the ability to be a very empowering force for Africans across the spectrum, regardless of what their wants, needs, or desires are. But we've got to think about them as humans with wants, needs, and desires, and us having the tools to fulfill those wants, needs, or desires. But it all starts for marketers. It all starts with customer insight. First, understand the customer, as opposed to, I've got a solution, let me see who needs to buy it. Right? It's all about what's the customer need I'm serving. And even with content in the digital world, I think we increasingly have a duty to curate it for people who are less literate, digitally literate, right? So how do I help the farmer find the stuff that's relevant to him? Because it's quite difficult to find on the internet when you're not au fait with it. How do we help those people and deliver mutual value, by the way? Because if we deliver value for him, there's lots of value for us, right? But how do we curate content? Because content is the big differentiator in the digital world. And if you can get the right content to people, it can change their lives. But we probably need to play more of a curator role as marketers in the technology space.
Mm-hmm. I was about to say something, and I thought I'd say this first. Some years ago, there was I think I was doing some work with one I think it was a consumer goods. No, actually it was a telco brand. And when we'd go to I'm not going to mention the name of the brand. When we'd go in for meetings, it was a taboo to mention the name of a competing brand, even when it's in an actual strategy session. Like, I'm not trying to throw shade. I'm not trying to be, we're having a very constructive conversation, but it's a taboo. So the best you can do is mention the name of the color, right? I wanted to reference another telco brand who have had their marketing leader on this show as well. In that spirit of not mentioning the name of another telco brand in the presence of another telco brand, I was talking to this person, and they spoke about a particular proposition that they had that made it very easy for them to sort of speak to let's kind of talk about this farmer and like this more remote or rural customer. And, there was like a very perfect alignment between, that particular audience segment and this product innovation that they had done, to the extent that it wasn't so much as it wasn't even it wasn't a connectivity call or data product. It was actually a financial services product,
Yep.
and for them, that really landed whatever the purpose of the brand was for that customer. And I guess that's the conversation, is that whatever the central value prop is, how does it find expression
Correct.
across the audience segments that we cater to? I wanted to ask you this. Sometimes from the outside looking in, and for those who've been in the marketing space for a bit of time might agree to this, it almost sometimes appears from the outside looking in that marketing is all about, this campaign and that campaign and this campaign. Sometimes, some brand managers don't help, because it's almost like they have a calendar of brand events. I'm supposed to launch a consumer campaign Q1. I'm supposed to launch a promotional campaign Q2. No, promotional campaigns are typically Q3. Just kind of show you, like, I'm kind of like, I kind of have an idea of that calendar, So, and sometimes it's almost like, just ticking the box. This campaign, that project. I wanted to ask you, as a marketing leader, and I haven't been that for a long time, what really is the role of a marketing leader?
So from my point of view, I mean, ultimately, we are, you're responsible for unlocking business value, right? You are, that's the reason we exist, right? The campaigns are a tool. They're an enabler to engage consumers, educate consumers, and in so doing form a relationship, right? But let me pull the lens back a bit. I always like to talk of it, and if whoever's listening to this podcast, if you're an aspiring marketer, think about it this way: is marketing is about logic and magic, right? And often the hard part for good marketing people to do is the logic part, because that's the left brain part, and good marketers are left brain and right brain, analytical and creative, right? And the analytical part is, I need what we spoke about earlier, Tayo, consumer insight. If I don't know what somebody wants, I can't develop a solution for them, right? So the first thing is about insight. The second thing is about quantifying the opportunity. If this is the need, how big is the need? Can we sell a lot of this stuff, right? Are there a lot of people who have this need? Is the first thing. And then the third thing is, where do I find these customers, right? All of the people with this need, where do I find them? So it's the left brain bit, right? I've got a customer need. There are a lot of people who want to talk to their loved ones in, let's say, there are a lot of people in Lagos who want to talk to their loved ones in New York, as an example, right? Then I say, okay, how many Nigerian expats are there in New York? There are 4 million. Okay, that's a big opportunity. Now, how do I find these? How do I connect these two people, right? So what I do is I then say, okay, I'm going to find them on Nigerian content websites in New York, and I'm going to sell them voice bundles to call back to Lagos with, right? That is all you can eat, or VoIP bundles. So that's the analytical bit. Then the magic bit is how you create a piece of an engaging piece of creative that gets that person in New York to click on the button or to look at the ad and say, I want to buy that product. I want to have a relationship with that brand. That's the magic bit, right? But what you're talking about, and where you're being slightly facetious with, is that we always think of marketing as just these moments of magic. But it's actually, the logic is where the business value is.
Right.
The creativity and the magic unlocks that opportunity for the business. But if we didn't unlock this value, right, we wouldn't have jobs, because ultimately shareholders pay our salaries.
Yeah.
And so we try to unlock value for them, but it is mutual value for the consumer as well. So we've got to deliver value to the consumer and deliver value to the business. So in summary, logic and magic. And as an old boss of mine used to like to say, our job is to make the complex simple and the simple exciting. And that's kind of what marketing is in a nutshell.
Oh boy. I feel like if I had like sound effects, with the DJs.
Vuvuzela.
Yeah, Vuvuzela. You had me at unlocking business value. Oh
Yeah.
man. I was talking to Gonzalo Brojo. That's the global CEO and president Interbrand.
Yeah.
And he simply said, Tayo, marketing is business.
Yeah.
Marketing is
Yeah.
business. Like if any marketing person doesn't understand that, like he doesn't know how to help them. Like
Mhm.
marketing is business. And you pretty much are saying the same thing. Is that
Yeah.
your responsibility is to unlock business value. And I
Yeah.
like how you supported that with that framework of logic and magic. I
Yeah.
absolutely love it. And I think like that literally is a playbook for any marketing professional or marketing leader to take
Yeah.
away if they are listening to this episode. Speaking about campaigns though, and this creative, this
Yeah.
creative side of it, how do you navigate that, especially when you have to oversee multiple markets and the
Yeah.
diverse cultures and and the diversity that Africa represents. I was looking at I saw a video earlier today, and the guy was talking about how Hollywood represents how Africans speak English, and it's the same tone for every so it's almost like when it's an African character in a Hollywood movie and the person is supposed to obviously speak their lines, the tone, the inflection, everything is the same. And the gentleman was critiquing it, saying, as Africans, we don't all sound the same. Like if you hear a
Mhm.
Nigerian speaking English, this is a Nigerian. If you hear a South African speaking English, you can tell the differences. That's just an example of how diverse we are as a people. And I'm curious to ask you that as you develop and as you work with your team, and you develop these creative tools, whether it's a campaign,
Mhm.
whether it's whatever it is, how do you navigate that diversity in such a way that you create something that connects regardless of whatever markets you expose it, at least within the African continent?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, very good question, very complex question, right?
Mm,
But I think needs for products are generally universal, right? And I
mm,
think there are universal human truths. We
mm,
all want to love, we all need friendship, we all need all of those things, right? But because we all speak different languages, we eat different food, the way these things manifest themselves culturally through music, through art, is fundamentally different. And that's what makes it beautiful, right? The need is the same, you know, but I have a need for entertainment and rhythm. But me and my son have very different needs for entertainment and rhythm,
mm,
right? So, and so what you got to do is say, okay, what is the need we're serving? What is the universal human truth we're tapping into at a global level?
right.
But the execution has got to be very local, and if you can, hyper local. Because even in Nigeria, what happens in the north of Nigeria to River State to Lagos, is very different. So as you know from my name, my father's Italian. If you ask my father, what language do you speak? He doesn't say Italian. He'll say, I speak Vigenese,
Mm,
because Italian was only unified 150 years ago. And there are 150 languages there that are quite close to Italian, but 150 different languages. And the language they call Italian today is from Florence, really, right? But and his grandparents wouldn't have spoken Florentine. They only spoke Vigenese. And that's true of any country in Africa, right? So I think they're probably national languages. In South Africa, the lingua franca is English, but you could have 12, 13 different manifestations of the same idea. And the more hyper local it is, the more it resonates with people, the closer it is to them. So the closer you can get to people, the more engaging your communication is, the more they're willing to listen to you, the more they're willing to spend their money with you.
the ultimate task is to land that human truth.
There's the human truth, but the cultural manifestation needs to be
Got it.
hyperlocal,
Got it.
right?
Got it.
So
Got it.
that it's
Got
the
it.
same human truth,
Got
but
it.
the way it manifests itself needs to be as close to that customer as possible. And that's what we're all striving for, I guess.
Got it. hyper-personalization, hyper-personalization, hyper-localization, artificial intelligence, all of this exciting, new tech. How are you, and maybe obviously, I mean, I'm sure you can speak for anybody else, but how are you and your team? What are some of the exciting things you are doing, leveraging this tech, and is it working? Because I can tell from the text messages I get from my own service provider, it's not MTN, by the way. I'm not sure that hyper personalization is working, but I'm going to let you speak on this. Like hyper personalization, artificial intelligence, all of this exciting new tech. What are some of the things you're doing within in your role with your team, and is it working? Is it delivering the goods?
So, from a business point of view, it is working, right? So, there's this customer value management thing, and what does it say?
Yeah.
It says we're going to understand customers better. Now, in the old days, when you had before supercomputers, you maybe had a 10 by 10 matrix that said these are the customer dimensions across voice, across data, and we put them into clusters. And there are only 100 types of people in all of Nigeria, right? A 10 by 10 matrix. Today, we can do 2,000 different variables to say what is, and we could almost go to, depending on where you wake up in the morning, we know what your home location register is. We know the path you travel to work. We know how much data you use. We know what phone you're using. We know what the average usage of your phone is. So if you're not on the average, we know you're using our competitor network sometime during the day, or you're on Wi-Fi, right? We know where you work. So based on where you live and where you work, we know what your income is more or less, right? So all of these dimensions, you can start to form fairly accurate proxies for what these people are like, right? So they're no longer these broad 5 archetypes in the country. You can go to probably in Nigeria 500,000 archetypes, right? In a country of 200 million people. So 4 archetypes across 200 million people is like 50 million people per archetype. That's a lot of people looking alike, right?
That's unlikely.
I think, so principally that's what CVM does, right? The question you ask is it working? Yes, it's working, because what we see is those campaigns are increasingly giving us more and more lifts, right? Is the creative as personalized or engaging as we like? I think that's where we still have a path to walk. It's not there. But I'll give you an example of where hyper-personalization and hyper-locality in the digital place is working. So today, if you are on Facebook in Nigeria, we know, and you're a prepaid user, we know what's in your wallet. We know how much data you have, right? So what we can see is that you are using data. We know what your metering is, using so many megabits per second, and when you're going to run out. And before you run out, we will pop up something to you. It says, Tayo, you're going to run out. There's money in your mobile wallet. Would you like to recharge with another bundle, right? Another Facebook bundle. Or you don't have money in your wallet. Here's a loan. Click on here and take a loan from MTN. Click, and you go back in. Now you can do that. That same API we can put into Facebook, into TikTok, etc. But that is a very practical use of technology that says, we know the product you're using. We know where you digitally live. You digitally live on Facebook, right? How do we get you there with because we know how many megabits you use a day? How do we give you that product? If you don't have the product, give you a loan until you can next recharge. So I think that's a practical use of how the technology works. But it is, to tap into your criticism, right? It is still run by techies, right? That part of the business. It's run by the left brain people, our data scientists, our mathematicians. What we need is some creativity to be wrapped around that says.
Okay, I see. I completely where you landed it in terms of, and because obviously as you're talking, my brain is doing about 100 miles an hour. So where you landed it in terms of like this still being managed by techies and stuff. Because I've had my fair share of experience in dealing with this sort of like, whether it's CDPs or customer engagement platforms or things like that. And it's always a chore in terms of, when you have to work with the tech team and trying to get them to understand, to the point you were making earlier about logic and magic, and how there's a very strong need for that collaboration. How do you manage, how do you think about customer trust? Especially when you have this different layers of parameters and stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure you guys have all of your licenses in place and stuff like that. But how do you think about customer trust, especially with the I think with the conversation about trust, data privacy, all of these things? What are your thoughts around it, and what do you think can be done better?
What can be done better? So, firstly, I think let's go back to your question. What do you think about customer trust? For marketers, you've always got to personalize these relationships, right? If you think about the relationship people have with brands, often they're personal relationships, right? And if I were to say to you, Tayo, somebody who's betrayed your trust, would you give them your money again? I think I'd know what the answer that would be, right? And so when you're speaking to young marketing people, that's what you've got to impart on them, right? Don't think of marketing as this kind of external practice. It's a personal practice as well. And if you betray somebody's trust, you know what they're going to do. So don't betray their trust. That's got to be the ultimate thing. So that's the one side. The other side is we have legal obligations, right?
Absolutely.
But there's trust that's at kind of a legal level, and you're talking about Poppy. But there's also trust at a delivery level, right? If you said the product's going to work here and it doesn't work, take it back, right? And so these are some of the things where you've got to move from the transaction to customer lifetime value. This is the language business people speak, right? Because they're like, okay, you're giving the guy, you're taking the guy's phone back. We've just lost, I don't know, 20,000 naira, and the view is no. If this guy spends 1,000 naira a year with us and he stays with us for 50 years, we've gained 30,000 naira. Because it's about customer trust first, and then customer lifetime value. And then you've got to, whatever you say you're going to do, you've got to do. That's integrity, right? And so the product's got to do what it's got to do, and we've got to keep people's information private if we say we're going to keep it private, unless they've given us permission to use it.
How do you recommend that, especially when it comes to the use of these technologies, whether it's AI or data analytics? What's your recommendation in terms of how marketing teams or marketing leaders, leverage these technologies to sort of drive customer experience? What do you have any recommendations for marketing folks in terms of, with this AI and data analytics? What are if you were to say, to leverage this tech, you have to look out for this, you have to look out for that, you should look into this, you should look into that. What would that be for you?
Yeah, I think I'd feel like a charlatan lecturing people on AI because I'm not an expert. I think of ourselves as enthusiastic amateurs. We're probably in marketing at the forefront of what's happening, but I can tell you we're very far from being experts.
Absolutely.
Maybe the lesson I'd give to them, Tayo, is experiment fast, right? You've got to get into it, right? But do so with guardrails. Understand that there are biases, understand that there are false narratives. And so start on cohorts of people and see how that responds, right? So that's the way I would think about it is start fast, put guardrails in place, but iterate very fast with all of these technologies. And obviously we're in the privileged position of being in a tech business. So Nigeria, we've got 80 million customers. 100, the risk of talking to 100,000 of them is small. It's less than 1%, right? It's so we can 100,000, and in our business, people are quite responsive. So if I put out a message to 100,000, within 2 days, I'll know if a campaign's successful or not, if a technology's worked, right? So we call this, and we do then test and control. So we test the message, see if it works. So, and what the good thing is that AI allows you to do this at scale. So, when we speak about the magic bit, right? Increasingly, what we'll be able to do when we start getting it right is put 5 different bits of creative out and say that the one with the yellow color always works best, right? So the yellow color works best. So let's have, and you get rid of the other 4 creatives and then have 5 more with the yellow color and something else. And you see which works best. And we call that champion challenger. And you can iterate very quickly with that and scale very quickly. So I think
there's a number of things in there, Enzo. Like you literally just. I'm sorry. I'm right here. I'm taking notes.
No.
There's a lot to.
So let me start, and let me I speak very fast as well. But what I'd say is get in quickly, right? This is an arms race, to use that terminology. Get in quickly is the first thing. Put guardrails around it in terms of the size you execute at, but also be aware of biases that happen, and also false narratives that come out of AI, right? So be aware of those. So that's the second bit. The third bit is always do test and control.
Yep.
And then even in your test, have champion challenger. So have a number of iterations to see which works best. Then take the best one and again develop a number of options. And then you scale, right? I think those from my maths classes at university were called orthogonal tables, right? And how do you then take the best, fragment it, then cut off those that aren't performing well, fragment the best again. So you constantly, it's almost kind of like genetics, where you kind of get rid of kind of all the mutations and try to get the best one. So that's the way I think about it.
I think that is definitely it's literally this is a one pager in my mind.
Yeah.
Is that this is, as you can imagine, when I'm having these conversations, I am trying to be present and engaged as possible. Somewhere in the part of my brain, I'm also trying to identify those sweet spots. You know what I mean? Like, and I like how I love your second take on the question and an attempt to really outline sort of like step by step, what your recommendations are. And I'm definitely going to be clipping out that part as a standalone on its own for content. So thank you very, very much for that. As things continue to change, especially from the consumer standpoint, sometimes there might be some sort of there might be a need to rebrand. There might be a need to reposition, like we were talking earlier about a value prop that caters to a broader audience segment or whatever. As those kinds of needs arise, how do you get the internal teams and also even the consumer on board with the change?
Yeah. So one of the great privileges I had in my career was doing probably the biggest brand migration in Africa. We had a brand, you'll know the brand in South Africa, called Vodacom. I worked for Vodacom. It's on my CV, so I can talk about it. I don't need to say the red company, but there used to be a blue brand, right? And we had to migrate that to a red brand, which looked like Vodafone. Now you're talking about a brand with, at the time, 25, 30 million customers and 30,000 points of presence, right? That's going to cost you, $50 million to do. So this is a massive exercise to undertake. You also have 5,000 people who work in the organization who are wedded to this brand identity, right? So they don't want to let go. You have huge consumer likability, probably one of this country's most loved brands at the time. And you've then got to migrate it. So,
boy.
Exactly.
I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm on the edge of my seat for this one. I'm with you, Enzo. Keep it going.
So the one thing that I learned from that, the first thing is the most important thing for the leader is to get buy-in right from the top all the way to the bottom. And that is, being sensitive to people, listening to people about what they're fearful of losing, but also being firm on what they're gaining and why we need to do this, right? But what you want is alignment, but also collective ownership of the execution. Because and leaders in the organization and toxicity exists all over. And you need to make sure you get the leaders in the call center, the leaders in the store, all on your side, right? Or on the side of the decision. It's not your side. It's our decision, right? It's got to be from your idea to our decision. So that alignment from a leadership point of view, if you don't have that collective buy-in, I'd say that's the, setting the vision, getting people on your side. That's the most critical bit, because if you're the one who owns it, there's cynics out there looking for you to fail. If we all own it, what you have is an army of people who are going to help execute, right? So that's the first bit. The second bit is you've got to plan meticulously, right? You've got to say, how do I ensure that through every point of the marketing mix, I am better than I was before? And you've got to imbue the entire value chain with excellence that says we've got one chance to show people that because ultimately this is about the customer, right? Customers have got to believe that what they're getting is better than what they had in the past. Otherwise, you're in trouble. So everything we do has got to be better. So the deals we have, we're going to put better deals. The point of sale at stores are going to look better. We're going to refurbish the stores before this, etc., etc. So that's the second bit. Then you've got to execute deep, because because excellence is all encompassing. You can't be excellence 30%. You've got to be excellent 100%. So you say, how do you imbue excellence very deep and execute deep? And then I'd say execute fast, because what you don't want is a long tail. So to bring the story to an end, we rebranded 30,000 points of presence in 30 days. We put, I can't remember how many GRPs into the market, but we bought the most popular shows every day on TV for 30 days. So after 1 month, when we tested in market, our KPI was test recognition in market, old logo versus new logo. And what you want is something comparative. But what we were able to do is do that. And so we bought up all the red colored paint in South Africa, and we had to import more. But you got rid of...
What?
Yes. So when you, as a Vodacom staff member, walked in, there was a big bin, and you brought everything you owned, T-shirts, caps, and there were shelves there where you could take a golf shirt and a cap that was in the new logo and the new livery. So we got rid of all of that. Your business cards were printed in on your desk the day we changed the logo. Your access card, you were able to swap in and swap out. So because we had security, we had finance, everybody had bought into that. So that for me was, and people walked out of the office at 5:00 on a Friday. On a Monday when they walked in, there was a shining new light there with kind of the new livery across all of the offices in the country. So that was, for me,
wow.
All the sports teams we sponsored ran out the day we launched, ran out with a new logo. And some of them we got them to relinquish their traditional colors. And for one game on national TV, they ran out in a red jersey. So it was, I mean, still, I think it was a phenomenal success. And then ultimately, in any exercise tale, what I say to people is make sure you have the very best people on your team. Because, after all of that, what keeps all of that together is that the people in your team, you've got to have the very, very best people on your team. And in any business, it's like with any team. I'm a big soccer follower, but the people with the best people win.
What led to this rebrand? Because I think that one of the biggest challenges is rebranding efforts, especially for legacy brands, in the way you've kind of
Yeah.
described it, right? What led to it? What was the insight that led to this?
Yeah, I mean, this wasn't. There was no insight. This was a more difficult, right? When you have a troubled brand, where you rebrand, which you're trying to re-energize the brand. I've done that a few times. That's almost an easier exercise
Right,
because the people you're trying to attract, they've fallen out of love with the brand. Yeah, you're taking a very loved brand and you have to rebrand. That's very difficult, right? And often what happens with this is there's a change in shareholding. And what happened was Vodafone used to own 50%. They bought 35% from another shareholder. They owned 85. And their global strategy was to rebrand and have a common identity across all of the territories. So it wasn't kind of deep research and deep insight. It was
right.
your new
Got it.
shareholder telling you,
Got it. Got it.
please do this quickly.
Got it. Got it. Got it. So I think
Yeah.
this is my final question. What when you look at the state of marketing on the continent
Yeah.
today, um, um, and I started thinking about marketing from a continental standpoint.
Yeah.
Ever since I took interest in the Cannes Lions Festival, and that's kind of where my pride in on the continent and the quality of what we produce across board kind of came into it. When you look at marketing on the African continent today, what excites you and what concerns you?
Um, what excites me? What excites me is increasingly we're telling our own stories, right? And increasingly we are celebrating, we're not trying to reproduce European ads in Africa. We're using our own creativity and we're telling our own stories. And I can
Right.
tell you, I've been a marketer on this continent for many years. I have the privilege, I've probably been in more African countries than most people in marketing, and many times. And I think what excites me is the talent is getting better. I know at MTN, I love traveling our countries because in every country, I always tell people, and and I don't know who you worked for before, Tayo, but I always say MTN in Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, the brightest people in that country want to work for MTN, right?
I
So
agree.
we have the talent, and so I think we have the creativity, we have the talent, and increasingly we're telling our own stories, right?
Got it.
What what I think is concerns me, but it's also an opportunity, right? And it again requires leadership, our leadership, but also political leadership and
Mhm.
political will. Is this thing of AI, right? Is an opportunity for us to close the digital divide if we
Mm.
embrace it and make it happen, right? But it requires all of us to be putting our best foot forward in that. If we don't do it, right, you potentially see the developed wealthy world taking this technology to race ahead and leaving us behind.
Wow. That's a clarion call, Enzo. That's a clarion
Yeah.
call. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. This was back to back, and I'm so happy. I don't know. I don't know if you can tell. I'm so happy because I had this whole list of things I wanted to go through with you, and I'm very, very happy that I ended up doing that. Thank you for being so generous with your insights, your experience. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. There's a lot of takeaways. And in terms as when we do publish this episode, I see a lot of snackable bits of 1, 2 minutes, 2, 3, 4 minutes, cut out that people can just take and really get something meaningful from. Thank you so much. I definitely will be in touch. I hope that in the next few months we should be having a physical event in different markets across Africa. When that time draws closer, I'll be in touch, and I hope that we'll be able to do this again. Hopefully, face to face at a very nice location somewhere in Joburg or Cape Town. when we do have our live events in South Africa. Thank you so much, Enzo. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show. And if you're in Joburg or Cape Town, and if you drink wine, I owe you a really good glass of wine. And just from my side, I think you are doing some really good work, and I wish you all the success you deserve.
Wow, thank you. That means a lot.
Okay.
That means a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for listening. It's been another incredible episode on the Diary of a CMO. I'm very sure you enjoyed it. Feel free to watch, re-watch, re-listen. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and see you at work. Bye.
Ciao.